Lord Tennyson was born in 1809, the fourth of 12 children. His father, Dr. George Tennyson, was a priest, and he was actually very unhappy because he was born the eldest in his family, and he did not get the inheritance that he was promised and that he should have received. Therefore, he was very mean to his children and quite an alcoholic, I must say. But amidst this, Alfred Lord Tennyson grew up, and his house was not very happy. He had a brother who was committed to an insane asylum. He had a brother that always quarreled with his father, a brother who was addicted to opium, but, he stayed kind of in his pursuit of poetry, and the whole school thing didn't quite work out for him. He tried school for 4 years, but then he turned more to homeschooling, where he perfected the craft of poetry. And after that, he was very happy to leave his not-so-happy home, and he went to college, where he joined the Apostles Poetry Group. He was actually invited because he was quite talented. Even at a very young age, he had published some poetry with his brother, and they had definitely noticed him for his talent, and that is where he met his best friend, Arthur. Arthur Hallam and Alfred Lord Tennyson had a great friendship. They were very, very close because of the Apostles, where they had met in college. And Arthur and Alfred were both poets, and Arthur had actually criticized a lot of Tennyson's poetry, and that's considered some of the best criticisms of his works that is ever been known. Now, in 1833, however, Arthur had died at a very young age, possibly of a stroke. Now, this had absolutely destroyed Tennyson. He was so upset by the fact that his friend for so many years had passed. Now, a couple years later, he had actually become engaged to his longtime love, Emily. Now, at the time, he wasn't able to marry his long-term love because he didn't have enough money. Now, in 1850, he actually became the poet laureate, which he was able to obtain some wealth. So in 1850, he was able to eventually marry his wife, Emily. So In Memoriam is actually a collection of 131 poems by Tennyson that he made for his friend Arthur Hallam. And it is actually a tribute to him and what Arthur had meant to him as a friend. In Memoriam actually has a different kind of setup than a lot of his other poems, and it's by the In Memoriam stanza, which is popularized by Tennyson, and it had actually been used before him by Shakespeare in a lot of his sonnets, but he was the one that actually popularized it and made it something that writers could use in poetry in the future.
Number 6. One writes that other friends remain, that loss is common to the race, and common is the commonplace, and vacant chaff well meant for grain. That loss is common would not make my own less bitter, rather more, too common, never morning wore to evening, but some heart did break. Oh, what to her shall be the end, and what to me remains of good, to her perpetual maidenhood, and unto me no second friend.
The sixth poem, an In Memoriam, was truly a reflection of the raw pain that Alfred Tennyson felt when Arthur passed. And it's very emotional, it's very powerful, and in it he compares his loss of his friend with the loss that a fiancée would feel for her future husband when he died. And there's just this great sense of connection to Arthur, and it's actually believed that they may have had a homosexual relationship, and you can definitely tell from the way he expresses his feelings towards Arthur that the friendship was very, very strong, and possibly even more than a friendship.
22. The path by which we twain did go, which led by tracks that pleased us well, through 4 sweet years arose and fell, from flower to flower, from snow to snow. And we with singing cheered the way, and crowned with all the season lent, from April on to April went, and glad at heart from May to May. But where the path we walked began to slant the 5th autumnal slope, as we descended following hope, there sat the shadow feared of man, who broke our fair companionship, and spread his mantle dark and cold, and wrapped thee formless in the fold, and dulled the murmur on thy lip, and bore thee where I could not see nor follow, though I walk in haste, and think that somewhere in the waste the shadow sits and waits for me.
The 22nd poem, an In Memoriam, is kind of a summary of Alfred Lord Tennyson's life, and it's kind of an explanation of what for him was the biggest event in his life, which was the death of his friend Arthur. Before that, Alfred Lord Tennyson had had a relatively uneventful life. I mean, he had a couple family issues, but he hadn't had anything major happen to him. And Arthur was his very best friend. He was very, very close to Arthur. And Arthur's death at such a young age from illness was very traumatic for Alfred.
24. And was the day of my delight as pure and perfect as I say? The very source and fount of day is dashed with wandering isles of night. If all was good and fair we met, this earth had been the paradise it never looked to human eyes since our first sun arose and set. And is it that the haze of grief makes former gladness loom so great, the lowness of the present state that sets the past in this relief? Or that the past will always win a glory from its being far, an orb into the perfect star we saw not when we moved therein?
When the past really comes out is in number 24 of In Memoriam, and it sort of shows this questioning of whether the Victorian era loved the past because it was better than the present or because it was the past.
Something that's really important in a lot of Tennyson's work is the fact that he's always talking about the past, whether that be about his own personal past, about how he had lost one of his best friends, Arthur, or whether he's talking about the Arthurian legend and about times gone by. And I think something that's really evident between the two of them is the fact that he's always talking about how, just the Victorian period itself, about how they were afraid of technological innovation, about how they were afraid of going into a future unknown. They were so set in their ways and so, concerned about the past and concerned about a simpler time of where somebody can pull a sword from a stone, which is such a simple task, and become a hero. And now they have such a different understanding of what a good person is, and it's so mixed with what technology has become and who can be a hero and who is considered good or bad.
126. Love is and was my lord and king, and in his presence I attend, to hear the tidings of my friend, which every hour his couriers bring. Love is and was my king and lord, and will be, though as yet I keep within the court on earth and sleep, encompassed by his faithful guard, and here at times a sentinel, who moves about from place to place, and whispers to the worlds of space, in the deep night, that all is well.
So the poem 126 in Memoriam is actually, Tennyson is discussing kind of a lot of the Arthurian legend and relating it to his own personal life. When he's talking about, love being his king and his lord, he's referring to the love that he had for his friend Arthur Hallam. And he's talking about how, to him, he would always be flawless, that he would always be his own king and his own perfect epic hero. And a lot of his own poems, he talks about the Arthurian legend.
The main points in it are that King Arthur became king because he was able to pull a sword from a stone that said, whoever can pull this sword from this stone is king of the land. So when he did that, the whole kingdom rejoiced and was and accepted him as his king. And it's just such a simple idea that since he was able to do this one task, they accepted him as such a great leader. And that's when he became the perfect man.
And King Arthur in the Victorian period was considered the epitome of a hero. He was what an epic hero should be, and Tennyson was completely obsessed by this. He felt that a hero had to be brave and strong and flawless and perfect in every single way. And so by believing this, Tennyson actually related this to his own friend Arthur, and he believed that just as Arthur was considered perfect and flawless to the people of the Victorian period, Arthur, his friend, was actually completely perfect and flawless to himself.
In another way, Hallam is the hero of In Memoriam. And by creating a sort of hero through all the different poems of In Memoriam, people could read In Memoriam and relate it to the tale of Arthur and just realize how great a person in Tennyson's eyes that Arthur Hallam actually was. So the whole legend is told in a 12-part series of all these stories, and they're just showing that a simpler time where even just like pulling the sword out of the stone is deemed as like this awesome way to become king, and like that solidifies the power into Arthur in that point. And the Victorians ate this up, and they loved King Arthur because he was that representation of the ideals of a past time, and also he was the perfect man, so it was fitting with the patriarchal family style, and they just really loved all the ideals, the chivalry, and everything that had to do with King Arthur, and Tennyson bringing that became also a more important part of the Victorian literature.
From Idylls of the King. Then Arthur charged his warrior, whom he loved and honoured most, Sir Launcelot, to ride forth and bring the Queen, and watched him from the gates. And Launcelot passed away among the flowers, for then was latter April, and returned among the flowers in May with Guinevere, to whom arrived by Dubric the high saint, chief of the church in Britain, and before the stateliest of her altar shrines, the king that morn was married, while in stainless white, the fair beginners of a nobler time, and glorying in their vows and him, his knights stood round him, and rejoiced in his joy.
One of the major works of Tennyson was Idylls of the King, which is the retelling of King Arthur and his whole legends. The first time he wrote about King Arthur was in the Mort d'Arthur, which is the passing or the death of Arthur, and then that is developed into the passing of Arthur, which is included in the Idylls of the King. And you can kind of see the connection between Tennyson's life and the passing of Arthur, or the Mort d'Arthur, by putting Arthur as in Arthur Hallam instead of King Arthur, as in he is, to Tennyson, that perfect man that King Arthur was.
Alfred Lord Tennyson has a style that is definitely all his own. And it's kind of interesting because he develops really complex stories and really really epic stories, but he does it in such a simple, refined manner. He definitely developed his writing. He wasn't quite a natural, as one would say. He definitely worked to develop his art, and it's shown how effective his rhyme is. Alfred Lord Tennyson uses a really simple rhyme scheme, and it works for him because it's, again, that idea of going back to the simplicity of the past. He has such beautiful, eloquent, and powerful words, and they all rhyme, and it makes quite a statement.